Hours in a Library by Virginia Woolf, from Granite and Rainbow. Let us begin by clearing up the old confusion between the man who loves learning and the man who loves reading, and point out that there is no connection whatever between the two. A learned man is a sedentary, concentrated, solitary enthusiast who searches through books to discover some particular grain of truth upon which he has set his heart. If the passion for reading conquers him, his gains dwindle and vanish between his fingers. A reader, on the other hand, must check the desire for learning at the outset. If knowledge sticks to him, well and good, but to go in pursuit of it, to read on a system, to become a specialist or an authority, is very apt to kill what it suits us to consider the more humane passion for pure and disinterested reading. In spite of all this, we can easily conjure up a picture which does service for the bookish man and raises a smile at his expense. We conceive a pale, attenuated figure in a dressing gown, lost in speculation, unable to lift a kettle from the hob or address a lady without blushing, ignorant of the daily news, though versed in the catalogues of the second-hand booksellers, in whose dark premises he spends the hours of sunlight, and delightful character, no doubt, in his crabbed simplicity, but not in the least resembling that other to whom we would direct attention. For the true reader is essentially young. He is a man of intense curiosity, is more of the nature of brisk exercise in the open air than of sheltered study. He trudges the high road. He climbs higher and higher upon the hills until the atmosphere is almost too fine to breathe in. To him, it is not a sedentary pursuit at all. But, apart from general statements, it would not be hard to prove by an assembly of facts that the great season for reading is the season between the ages of 18 and 24. The bare list of what is read then fills the heart of older people with despair. It is not only that we read so many books, but that we had such books to read. If we wish to refresh our memories, let us take down one of those old notebooks which we have all, at one time or another, had a passion for beginning. Most of the pages are blank, it is true, but at the beginning we shall find a certain number very beautifully covered with a strikingly legible handwriting. Here we have written down the names of great writers in their order of merit. Here we have copied out fine passages from the classics. Here are lists of books to read. And here, most interesting of all, lists of books that have actually been read, as the reader testifies with some youthful vanity by a dash of red ink. We will quote a list of the books that someone read in a past January at the age of 20, most of them probably for the first time. 1. Rhoda Fleming. 2. The Shaving of Shagpat. 3. Tom Jones. 4. The Laodicene. 5. Dewey's Psychology. 6. The Book of Job. 7. Webb's Discourse of Poesy. 8. The Duchess of Malfi. 9. The Revenger's Tragedy. And so he goes on from month to month until, as such lists will, it suddenly stops in the month of June. But if we follow the reader through his months, it is clear that he can have done practically nothing but read. Elizabethan literature is gone through with some thoroughness. He read a great deal of Webster, Browning, Shelley, Spenser, and Congreve. Peacock he read from start to finish, and most of Jane Austen's novels 2 or 3 times over. He read the whole of Meredith, the whole of Ibsen, and a little of Bernard Shaw. We may be fairly certain, too, that the time not spent in reading was spent in some stupendous argument in which the Greeks were pitted against the moderns, romance against realism, Racine against Shakespeare, until the lights were seen to have grown pale in the dawn. The old lists are there to make us smile, and perhaps to sigh a little, but we would give much to recall also the mood in which this orgy of reading was done. Happily, this reader was no prodigy, and with a little thought we can most of us recall the stages at least of our own initiation. The books we read in childhood, having purloined them from some shelf supposed to be inaccessible, have something of the unreality and awfulness of a stolen sight of the dawn coming over quiet fields when the household is asleep. Peeping between the curtains, we see strange shapes of misty trees, which we hardly recognize, though we may remember them all our lives, for children have a strange premonition of what is to come. But the later reading of which the above list is an example is quite a different matter. For the first time, perhaps, all restrictions have been removed. We can read what we like. Libraries are at our command, and, best of all, friends who find themselves in the same position. For days upon end, we do nothing but read. It is a time of extraordinary excitement and exaltation. We seem to rush about recognizing heroes. There is a sort of wonderment in our minds that we ourselves are really doing this, and mixed with it an absurd arrogance and desire to show our familiarity with the greatest human beings who have ever lived in the world. The passion for knowledge is then at its keenest, or at least most confident, and we have too an intense singleness of mind which the great writers gratify by making it appear that they are at one with us in their estimate of what is good in life. And, as it is necessary to hold one's own against some of who has adopted Pope, let us say, instead of Sir Thomas Browne, for a hero, we conceive a deep affection for these men, and feel that we know them not as other people know them, but privately by ourselves. We are fighting under their leadership and almost in the light of their eyes. So we haunt the old bookshops and drag home folios and quartos, Euripides and wooden boards, and Voltaire in 89 volumes, octavo. But these lists are curious documents, in that they seem to include scarcely any of the contemporary writers. Meredith and Hardy and Henry James were of course alive when this reader came to them, but they were already accepted among the classics. There is no man of his own generation who influences him as Carlyle or Tennyson or Ruskin influenced the young of their day. And this we believe to be very characteristic of youth. For unless there is some admitted giant, we will have nothing to do with the smaller men, although they deal with the world he lives in. He will rather go back to the classics and consort entirely with minds of the very first order. For the time being, he holds himself aloof from all the activities of men, and looking at them from a distance, judges them with superb severity. Indeed, one of the signs of passing youth is the birth of a sense of fellowship with other human beings as we take our place among them. We should like to think that we keep our standard as high as ever, but we certainly take more interest in the writings of our contemporaries and pardon their lack of inspiration for the sake of something that brings them nearer to us. It is even arguable that we get actually more from the living, although they may be much inferior, than from the dead. In the first place, there can be no secret vanity in reading our contemporaries, and the kind of admiration which they inspire is extremely warm and genuine, because in order to give way to our belief in them, we have often to sacrifice some very respectable prejudice which does us credit. We have also to find our own reasons for what we like and dislike, which acts as a spur to our attention and is the best way of proving that we have read the classics with understanding. Thus, to stand in a great bookshop crammed with books so new that their pages almost stick together, and the gilt on their backs is still fresh, has an excitement no less delightful than the old excitement of the second-hand bookstall. It is not perhaps so exalted, but the old hunger to know what the mortal's thought has given place to a far more tolerant curiosity to know what our generation is thinking. What do living men and women feel? What are their houses like, and what clothes do they wear? What money have they, and what food do they eat? What do they love and hate? What do they see of the surrounding world, and what is the dream that fills the spaces of their active lives? They tell us all these things in their books. In them, we can see as much both of the mind and of the body of our time as we have eyes for seeing. When such a spirit of curiosity has fully taken hold of us, the dust will soon lie thick upon the classics unless some necessity forces us to read them. For the living voices are, after all, the ones we understand the best. We can treat them as we treat our equals. They are guessing our riddles, and, what is perhaps more important, we understand their jokes. And we soon develop another taste, unsatisfied by the great, not a valuable taste, perhaps, but certainly a very pleasant possession, the taste for bad books. Without committing the indiscretion of naming names, we know which authors can be trusted to produce yearly, for happily they are prolific, a novel, a book of poems or essays, which affords us indescribable pleasure. We owe a great deal to bad books. Indeed, we come to count their authors and their heroes among those figures who play so large a part in our silent life. Something of the same sort happens in the case of the memoir writers and autobiographers who have created almost a fresh branch of literature in our age. They are not all of them important people, but strangely enough, only the most important, the dukes and the statesmen, are ever really dull. The men and women who set out, with no excuse except perhaps that they saw the Duke of Wellington once, to confide to us their opinions, their quarrels, their aspirations, and their diseases, generally end by becoming, for the time at least, actors in those private dramas with which we beguile our solitary walks and our sleepless hours. Refine all this out of our consciousness, and we should be poor indeed. And then there are the books of facts and history, books about bees and wasps and industries and gold mines and empresses and diplomatic intrigues, about rivers and savages, trade unions, and acts of parliament, which we always read and always, alas, forget. Perhaps we are not making out a good case for a bookshop when we have to confess that it gratifies so many desires which have apparently nothing to do with literature. But let us remember that here we have a literature in the making. From these new books, our children will select the one or two by which we shall be known forever. Here, if we could recognize it, lies some poem or novel, or history which will stand up and speak with other ages about our age when we lie prone and silent at the crowd of Shakespeare's day is silent and lives for us only in the pages of his poetry. This we believe to be true, and yet it is oddly difficult in the case of new books to know which are the real books and what it is that they are telling us, and which are the stuffed books which will come to pieces when they have lain about for a year or two. We can see that there are many books, and we are frequently told that every one can write nowadays. That may be true, yet we do not doubt that at the heart of this immense volubility, this flood and foam of language, this iridescence and vulgarity and triviality, there lies the heat of some great passion which only needs the accident of a brain more happily turned than the rest to issue in a shape which will last from age to age. It should be our delight to watch this turmoil, to do battle with the ideas of visions of our time, to seize what we can use, to kill what we consider worthless, and above all to realize that we must be generous to the people who are giving shape as best they can to the ideas within them. No age of literature is so little submissive to authority as ours, so free from the dominion of the great. None seems so wayward with its gift of reverence, or so volatile in its experiments. It may well seem, even to the attentive, that there is no trace of school or aim in the work of our poets and novelists. But the pessimist is inevitable, and he shall not persuade us that our literature is dead, or prevent us from feeling how true and vivid a beauty flashes out as the young writers draw together to form their new vision, the ancient words of the most beautiful of living languages. Whatever we may have learnt from reading the classics, we need now in order to judge the work of our contemporaries. For whenever there is life in them, they will be casting their net out over some unknown abyss to snare new shapes, and we must throw our imaginations after them if we are to accept with understanding the strange gifts they bring back to us. But if we need all our knowledge of the old writers in order to follow what the new writers are attempting, it is certainly true that we come from adventuring among new books with a far keener eye for the old. It seems that we should now be able to surprise their secrets, to look deep down into their work and see the parts come together, because we have watched the making of new books, and with eyes clear of prejudice can judge more truly what it is that they are doing, and what is good and what bad. We shall find probably that some of the great are less venerable than we thought them. Indeed, they are not so accomplished or so profound as some of our own time. But if in one or two cases this seems to be true, a kind of humiliation mixed with joy overcomes us in front of others. Take Shakespeare, or Milton, or Sir Thomas Browne. Our little knowledge of how things are done does not avail us much here, but it does lend an added zest to our enjoyment. Did we ever, in our youngest days, feel such amazement at their achievement as that which fills us now that we have sifted myriads of words and gone along uncharted ways in search of new forms for our new sensations? New books may be more stimulating and in some ways more suggestive than the old, but they do not give us that absolute certainty of delight which breathes through us when we come back again to Comus or Lycidas, Urn Burial, or an Antony and Cleopatra. Far be it from us to hazard any theory as to the nature of art. It may be that we shall never know more about it than we know by nature, and our longer experience of it teaches us this only, that of all our pleasures, those we get from the great artists are indisputably among the best, and more we may not know. But advancing no theory, we shall find one or two qualities in such works as these which we can hardly expect to find in books made within the span of our lifetime. Age itself may have an alchemy of its own. But this is true. You can read them as often as you will without finding that they have yielded any virtue and left a meaningless husk of words. And there is a complete finality about them. No cloud of suggestions hangs about them, teasing us with a multitude of irrelevant ideas, but all our faculties are summoned to the task, as in the great moments of our own experience, and some consecration descends upon us from their hands which we return to life, feeling it more keenly and understanding it more deeply than before.